My name is Peggy, and at 63, I never expected to be starting over again. After 40 years as an emergency room nurse in Denver, I thought my retirement plan was set. 6 months ago, I sold my house and moved in with my son Michael, his wife Jennifer, and my adorable twin grandchildren Emma and Ethan. I was excited to be part of their daily lives, but I quickly discovered there's a fine line between being a loving grandmother and becoming an unpaid, unappreciated nanny. When they finally delivered their ultimatum over childcare, I surprised everyone, including myself. Where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I packed my bag and walked out, proving it's never too late to reclaim your independence. When my husband Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 5 years ago, we thought we had more time. We'd spent our entire marriage planning for a retirement filled with travel volunteering and quiet evenings on the porch of our ranch-style home in the suburbs of Denver. Robert had worked as a civil engineer, designing bridges and infrastructure projects across Colorado. I dedicated my life to emergency medicine, working night shifts, holidays, and weekends to help support our family and put our son Michael through college. Robert and I had purchased our home when Michael was just 3 years old. It wasn't fancy, but it had a large backyard with a view of the mountains, 3 bedrooms, and enough space for a family to grow. Over 35 years, we transformed it into our sanctuary. Robert built a greenhouse where I could nurse orchids through Colorado's harsh winters. I created a reading nook in the spare bedroom after Michael left for college. Every corner held memories, the height marks on the kitchen doorframe, tracking Michael's growth. The dining room table where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays, the worn path in the carpet from Robert's late-night pacing when he struggled with insomnia. When Robert passed just 8 months after his diagnosis, I found myself alone in our home for the first time in nearly 40 years. The silence was deafening. I'd walk from room to room, touching his things, trying to keep his presence alive. His coffee mug still sat on his nightstand. His favorite sweater hung on the hook by the door. His gardening tools waited patiently in the shed. Michael was wonderful during this period. He came by regularly, helped with house maintenance, and made sure I wasn't isolating myself too much in my grief. He had built a good life for himself. After graduating with the computer science degree, which Robert and I had scraped to pay for, often working extra shifts and deferring our own needs, he'd secured a position at a successful tech company in downtown Denver. He'd married Jennifer, a driven marketing executive, and they'd built their dream home in an upscale neighborhood about 30 minutes from me. When the twins were born 4 years ago, I discovered a new purpose. Emma and Ethan were perfect bundles of joy who needed their grandmother's love, especially as both Michael and Jennifer maintained demanding careers. I'd drive over twice a week to give them a break, spending delightful hours rocking babies, preparing bottles, and later as the twins grew reading stories and building block towers. Being a grandmother was everything I'd hoped for. All the joy of children without the sleepless nights and constant responsibility. 3 years after Robert's passing, I had established a new routine. I volunteered at the hospital where I'd worked, joined a widow's support group, tended my garden, and spent time with my small but close circle of friends. The house was too big for just me, but I couldn't bear to leave the place where Robert and I had built our life, until Michael and Jennifer began suggesting another arrangement. "Mom, that house is so much work for you," Michael pointed out during a Sunday dinner at their place. "The property taxes keep going up and the maintenance never ends." "I manage just fine," I replied, though truth be told, the gutters needed cleaning and the lawn had grown somewhat wild that summer. "We've been thinking," Jennifer interjected, passing me a glass of wine. "Our basement is finished with its own bathroom and small kitchenette. It was meant to be a mother-in-law suite eventually. Why not now?" I nearly choked on my wine. "Move in with you, I couldn't impose like that." "It's not imposing," Michael insisted. "It makes perfect sense. You'd save on utilities, property taxes, and maintenance. You could put the house proceeds toward your retirement, and you'd see the kids every day instead of just twice a week. Plus, you wouldn't be alone anymore," Jennifer added. I worry about you in that big house by yourself. I brushed off the suggestion that first time and the second, but Michael and Jennifer were persistent. Each time I mentioned a home repair or a high utility bill, they renewed their offer. When I admitted to feeling lonely sometimes, they pointed out how their lively household would keep me engaged. When I expressed concern about being a burden, they assured me I'd have my own space and independence. You can come and go as you please, Michael promised. It's a separate entrance, so you'll have privacy when you want it and company when you need it. And the twins would be over the moon, Jennifer added. They adore their grandma. My friends were less enthusiastic about the idea. Living with adult children is complicated, warned my friend Sarah, who had moved in with her daughter only to move out 6 months later. No matter what they say about boundaries, they tend to blur over time. Make sure you have a backup plan, advised Louise from my widows group, and get any agreements in writing. But I dismissed their concerns as pessimism. My relationship with Michael was different, I thought. We'd always been close, and he respected my independence. Jennifer, while career-focused and sometimes a bit cold, had always been cordial. And the twins, well, who wouldn't want to see those precious faces every day? The decision wasn't easy, but after months of consideration, I agreed to sell my home and move in with them. The housing market in Denver was booming, and my modest ranch house sold for triple what Robert and I had paid for it. After paying off the small remaining mortgage, I had a substantial sum to add to my retirement savings. I kept telling myself this was the financially prudent choice, though my heart ached as I sorted through decades of accumulated memories. The hardest part was deciding what to keep and what to let go. My new space would be about a third of the size of my house. Robert's belongings, which I'd preserved like a shrine, needed to be addressed. I kept his wedding ring, a few sweaters that still held his scent, and the watch I'd given him on our 30th anniversary. The rest I donated or gave to Michael, tearfully explaining the story behind each item. My friends helped me organize a garage sale for furniture and household items I couldn't take with me. As neighbors and strangers carried away pieces of my past life, I vacillated between liberation and profound loss. The couple who bought Robert's workbench promised to use it to build furniture for their first child. A young nurse purchased my dining room table, explaining she'd just bought her first home and couldn't afford new furniture. These stories comforted me the idea that pieces of our life would continue in new homes. By the time moving day arrived, I had downsized to the essentials. My bedroom set a small couch and armchair books, photo albums, and personal mementos. Michael helped load everything into a moving van, and by that evening, I was officially a resident of his basement suite. That first night in my new space, surrounded by boxes and the unfamiliar sounds of a household above me, I sat on my bed and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But then I heard the patter of little feet on the floor above, followed by Ethan's infectious giggle, and I reminded myself why I'd done this. Family, connection, a new chapter. How could I have known then that what seemed like a solution to my loneliness would become a different kind of trap? That the warmth of family would come with expectations I hadn't agreed to? That 6 months later, I would find myself making the hardest decision since Robert's death. The first few weeks in Michael and Jennifer's home were everything I'd hoped for. My basement suite was comfortable and private, with a small sitting area, bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette where I could prepare simple meals. Large windows looked out onto their backyard, allowing natural light to brighten the space. Michael had installed a separate entrance so I could come and go without disturbing the main household, just as he'd promised. The twins were ecstatic about having their grandmother in the house. Emma, with her curly brown hair and serious expressions, would bring me drawings nearly every day. Ethan, more rambunctious and always in motion, loved to show me new tricks he'd learned or toys he'd discovered. In the evenings, I'd often join the family for dinner upstairs, sharing stories from my nursing days, or listening to Michael and Jennifer discuss their work challenges. "This is working out even better than I expected," Michael commented one evening as we cleaned up after dinner while Jennifer bathed the twins. "It's like when I was a kid having you in the house again. Remember how you used to quiz me on multiplication tables while you made dinner?" "Of course I remember." I smiled, warmed by his nostalgia and apparent happiness with our arrangement. "Though I hope I'm a bit less strict as a grandmother than I was as a mother." "You were never too strict," he assured me. "Just focused on what mattered. Dad and you both were." These moments reinforced my decision to move in. I felt needed, appreciated, connected to my family in a way that living alone couldn't provide. And I had my independence, too. During the day, while Michael and Jennifer worked, and the twins attended preschool, I volunteered at a local clinic twice a week, met friends for lunch, and explored my new neighborhood. The initial boundaries were clear and reasonable. I wasn't expected to provide childcare unless asked in advance, and those requests were infrequent and specific. "Mom, would you mind watching the kids next Friday evening? We have a work dinner." Or, "Could you possibly pick up the twins from preschool on Wednesday? Jennifer has a doctor's appointment, and I have a client meeting." I was happy to help on these occasions. After all, I loved spending time with Emma and Ethan, and it felt good to be useful to my busy son and daughter-in-law. The twins were generally well-behaved, though like all 4-year-olds, they had boundless energy and required constant supervision. About a month into our new living arrangement, the first subtle shift occurred. Jennifer came downstairs one morning as I was preparing to leave for my volunteer shift at the clinic. "Peggy, I hate to ask, but our nanny called in sick. Is there any chance you could skip volunteering today and watch the twins? It would be such a help." I hesitated only briefly. "Of course," I replied, reaching for my phone to call the clinic. "Family comes first." Jennifer's relief was palpable. "You're a lifesaver. There's chicken nuggets in the freezer for their lunch. I should be home by 5. That day with the twins was exhausting, but joyful. We played games, read stories, and took a walk to the neighborhood park. By the time Jennifer returned home, closer to 6 than 5, I was ready for the quiet of my basement retreat. But the grateful hug she gave me, something rare from my usually reserved daughter-in-law, made the tiredness worthwhile. "We really couldn't do this without you," she said, and I felt a glow of being truly valued. What I didn't recognize then was how that day established a new pattern. The following week, their regular nanny gave notice accepting a position with a family offering higher pay. Instead of immediately seeking a replacement, Jennifer approached me with a hesitant smile. "We're interviewing new nannies, but it might take a while to find someone we trust," she explained. "Would you mind filling in just for a couple of weeks? We'd adjust our schedules to minimize the impact." Again, I agreed. 2 weeks seemed manageable, and I wanted to help during their transition. I temporarily suspended my volunteer work and rescheduled some social commitments. Michael expressed his appreciation with a gift card to my favorite bookstore, and Jennifer seemed genuinely grateful for my flexibility. But 2 weeks stretched into 3, then a month. The interviews for new nannies always seemed to have some issue. Candidates who wanted too much money had limited availability or simply didn't click with the twins. Meanwhile, I found myself watching Emma and Ethan not just during work hours, but increasingly on evenings and weekends as well. "Jennifer's mother's group meets on Saturday mornings," Michael explained. "It's important for her to maintain those connections." "I have a golf game with clients," he'd say another time. "It's practically required for relationship building in my position." My own activities and friendships began to take a back seat to the family's needs. When I mentioned resuming my volunteer work, Jennifer's expression tightened. "The twins have really come to depend on you being here," she said. "They get so anxious with new caregivers. We're still looking for the right nanny, but in the meantime, it's so comforting knowing they're with family." The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. What grandmother doesn't want to be needed by her grandchildren? What mother doesn't want to support her son's career? And wasn't this arrangement supposed to be about family supporting each other? But as weeks turned into months, the imbalance in our arrangement became increasingly clear. I was no longer an independent adult with my own life who occasionally helped with childcare. I had become the default caregiver expected to be available whenever needed, with my own needs and interests treated as secondary or even irrelevant. The first time I tried to establish some boundaries, the response was immediate and troubling. I had been invited to a former colleague's retirement party, an evening event that conflicted with Jennifer's book club. "I'm sorry, but I've already committed to this," I explained when Jennifer assumed I would watch the twins. "It's important to me to be there for Carol's retirement. We worked together for 20 years. Jennifer's expression cooled noticeably. "I see. Well, I suppose I can try to reschedule, though it's been on the calendar for months. I just assumed you'd be available since you live here." "That's the thing," I said carefully. "I'm happy to help with the twins, but I do need some predictability for my own activities." Later that evening, Michael came to my suite, his expression concerned. "Mom, Jennifer mentioned you two had a disagreement about childcare." "Not a disagreement," I clarified. "I just explained that I need advance notice when you'd like me to babysit so I can plan my own schedule." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that it made my heart ache. "The thing is, Mom, we are providing you with housing. It seems reasonable to expect some contribution to the household in return." "Contribution?" I echoed, surprised by his framing. "Michael, I'm not a tenant refusing to pay rent. I'm your mother, and I do contribute. I cook meals, I help with laundry, I've taken on most of the grocery shopping. But being available for childcare 24/7 wasn't part of our original agreement." "There wasn't really a formal agreement," he pointed out. "We just thought it would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. You save on housing costs, and we get some help with the kids." "Some help," I repeated, "not becoming their primary caregiver." The conversation ended without resolution, but it marked a turning point in our relationship. There was now an unspoken tension, a sense that I was failing to meet expectations I hadn't known existed. Jennifer became more overt in her passive-aggressive comments. "Must be nice to have so much free time for reading," she'd remark, when finding me with a book during the twins' nap time. "We're really stretching our budget with childcare costs," she'd say over dinner, though I knew their combined income was substantial. The emotional toll began to affect my physical health. Chasing after energetic 4-year-olds was exhausting at 63, especially with my history of knee problems from years of standing during long nursing shifts. I found myself taking ibuprofen regularly for joint pain and collapsing into bed each night utterly depleted. More concerning was the impact on my relationship with the twins. I adored Emma and Ethan, but the joy of being their grandmother was being overshadowed by the stress of being their default caretaker. I wasn't just reading them occasional bedtime stories. I was managing tantrums, enforcing rules, and dealing with the daily challenges of raising young children, responsibilities I had thought were behind me. As my 5th month in their home approached, I realized with growing unease that I had become trapped in a situation that was slowly eroding my health, my independence, and even my relationship with my family. But the thought of confronting the issue directly filled me with anxiety. Where would I go if this arrangement ended? What would happen to my relationship with my son and grandchildren? I tried smaller attempts at reclaiming some independence. I joined a senior center and signed up for a weekly painting class. I reconnected with Sarah and Louise for monthly lunch dates. I blocked out Thursday afternoons as Grandma's personal time on the family calendar. But each attempt at boundary setting was met with resistance. My painting class conflicted with the twins' swimming lessons. My lunch dates were interrupted by texts asking when I'd be home. My Thursday afternoons were regularly invaded by emergencies that somehow always seemed to occur during my designated personal time. I began to understand what my friends had warned me about. The lines between being a loving family member and being taken advantage of had blurred beyond recognition. And somewhere along the way, my identity had been reduced to convenient childcare provider, rather than Peggy, a person with her own needs in life. What I didn't yet realize was that things would have to get much worse before they could get better. That a health scare would force the issue. That an ultimatum would finally clarify what I needed to do. And that finding the courage to walk away would ultimately be the key to saving not just myself, but potentially my relationship with my family as well. The Tuesday when everything began to unravel started like any other day. I woke early to help get the twins ready for preschool, while Michael and Jennifer prepared for work. Breakfast was the usual chaos of spilled cereal, missing shoes, and last-minute backpack checks. By the time the house emptied at 8:30, I was already feeling the familiar ache in my right knee, the one that had bothered me on and off since a fall in the ER 15 years earlier. I had promised Emma and Ethan we would go to the park after preschool, so I took advantage of the quiet morning to rest my knee and take some anti-inflammatories. But as I climbed the stairs to retrieve laundry from the twins' room, a sharp pain shot through my knee, causing me to stumble and grab the railing. The pain was different this time, more intense and localized. By afternoon, when I picked up the twins, my knee had swollen noticeably. Walking was difficult, and chasing after Ethan when he ran toward the duck pond at the park was excruciating. By evening, I could barely manage the stairs to my basement suite. "You should see a doctor," Michael observed at dinner, noticing my grimace as I shifted in my chair. "I'll call tomorrow," I promised. I probably just overdid it. The orthopedist I saw the next day was direct after examining my knee and reviewing the x-rays. "You've got a meniscus tear, Mrs. Wilson. Not uncommon at your age, especially with your nursing background. All those years on your feet take a toll." "What's the treatment?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Rest ice compression elevation, the usual drill. You'll need to stay off it as much as possible for at least 2 weeks. No lifting, no prolonged standing, and definitely no chasing after children." He gave me a knowing look. "You mentioned you help care for your grandchildren." "Yes, 4-year-old twins." He shook his head. "You'll need to take a break from that. 4-year-olds and knee injuries don't mix. I can prescribe physical therapy once the inflammation subsides, but for now, minimal activity is crucial if you want to avoid surgery." I left the appointment with a knee brace, a prescription for stronger anti-inflammatories, and a medical directive that would force the conversation I'd been avoiding for months. That evening, I explained the situation to Michael and Jennifer over dinner. "The doctor says I need to rest my knee completely for 2 weeks, I concluded. "After that, I'll start physical therapy, but I'll need to limit physical activity for at least a month." Michael looked concerned, but it was Jennifer's reaction that confirmed my fears. Her expression wasn't sympathy, but something closer to annoyance. 2 weeks. That's impossible with our schedules right now. Michael has that big project deadline and I'm presenting at the marketing conference next weekend." "I understand it's inconvenient," I acknowledged, "but this isn't optional. If I don't rest it now, I might need surgery later." "Can't you at least manage mornings and afternoons?" Jennifer pressed. "They're in preschool for half the day, and they usually have quiet time after lunch. You could elevate your knee then." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Had she heard anything I'd said? Jennifer, the doctor, was very clear. No childcare duties at all for 2 weeks. Even supervising them while sitting requires quick reactions if they get into something dangerous. "Well, this is just perfect timing," she muttered, "right before our anniversary weekend." I had forgotten about their planned 3-day trip to a mountain resort, a tradition since before the twins were born. It had been mentioned months ago, but in the daily chaos, it had slipped my mind entirely. Now I understood the source of Jennifer's frustration. They had assumed I would watch the twins while they were away. "I'm sorry about the timing," I said sincerely. "But perhaps this is an opportunity to find that nanny you've been looking for. Even a temporary sitter for the next few weeks while I recover." The silence that followed was telling. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, a wordless communication that excluded me entirely. Hiring someone last minute would be very expensive, Michael finally said, especially for a full weekend. And finding someone we trust with the twins isn't easy, Jennifer added. They're used to you, Mom. They'd be upset with a stranger. The implication was clear. Despite medical advice, they expected me to continue as the twins' caretaker. My health was secondary to their convenience and budgetary concerns. I spent a restless night, my knee throbbing, despite the prescribed medication, my mind racing with worry and frustration. By morning, I had made a decision. This couldn't continue. I needed to advocate for myself, even if it created conflict. After Michael and Jennifer left for work and the twins for preschool, I researched local childcare options. I found several reputable nanny agencies with emergency placement services and a drop-in daycare center with excellent reviews. I compiled the information, including costs, and prepared to present it as a solution when they returned home. That evening, I approached them with my research. I've found some options for childcare while my knee heals. I began sliding the printed pages across the table. This agency specializes in temporary placements, and they can have someone start as soon as tomorrow. Their caregivers are fully vetted with background checks. Jennifer barely glanced at the papers. Do you have any idea what professional nannies charge in Denver? It's almost as much as our mortgage payment. I understand it's expensive, I acknowledged. I'm willing to contribute from my savings toward the cost, since this is my medical issue. That's not the point, Mom, Michael interjected. The twins are comfortable with you. Introducing a stranger now would just upset them. They'll be more upset if I physically can't care for them properly, I pointed out. And my knee won't heal if I don't follow the doctor's orders. Jennifer pushed back from the table with barely concealed irritation. I need to finish packing for our trip. We can discuss this later. But later never seemed to arrive. Over the next 2 days, my attempts to discuss alternative childcare arrangements were met with deflection, subject changes, or outright absence as Michael and Jennifer busied themselves with work and trip preparations. By Saturday morning, the situation reached its breaking point. Michael and Jennifer were finishing their packing, the twins were playing in the living room, and I was sitting with my knee elevated, feeling increasingly invisible and dismissed. When Jennifer walked past me carrying her overnight bag toward the front door, I made one final attempt. Jennifer, we still haven't resolved the childcare situation. I really cannot watch the twins for 3 days on my own with this knee injury. She set down her bag with a sigh of exasperation. Peggy, we've been planning this trip for months. The reservation is non-refundable. I'm not asking you to cancel your trip, I clarified. I'm asking you to arrange for appropriate childcare given my medical condition. At this point, everyone we know is busy and a last-minute professional sitter would cost a fortune, she replied, her voice rising. Why is this suddenly such an issue? You've watched them plenty of times before. Yes, when I was physically able to, I countered, my own frustration mounting. But right now, I simply cannot safely care for 2 energetic 4-year-olds. I need to follow my doctor's orders. The twins had stopped playing, sensing the tension in the room. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit, watching us with wide eyes. Ethan moved closer to his sister, unusually subdued. Jennifer's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We gave you a place to live, a comfortable space of your own, and all we ask in return is that you help with your own grandchildren. Help, yes, I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. Not become their full-time, unpaid caregiver, regardless of my own health or needs. Michael entered the room, alerted by our raised voices. What's going on? He asked, though his expression suggested he'd heard enough to understand. Your mother is refusing to watch the twins while we're away, Jennifer stated flatly. After everything we've done for her. I turned to my son, hoping for some understanding. Michael, I physically cannot do it right now. The doctor was very clear. He looked between Jennifer and me, clearly uncomfortable with the conflict. Then, instead of supporting his mother's health concerns, he took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. "Mom, we need to be clear. Either you help with the kids as needed, or this living arrangement isn't going to work." Jennifer nodded emphatically. "Exactly. We've given you a place to live. The least you can do is watch your own grandchildren." The twins had begun to whimper, distressed by the tension. Emma buried her face in her rabbit while Ethan's lower lip trembled ominously. But in that moment, something crystallized for me. This wasn't about childcare or my knee or even this particular weekend. This was about fundamental respect, or the lack thereof. About seeing me as a person with legitimate needs versus a convenient solution to their childcare challenges. As this realization washed over me, a strange calm settled in my chest. The anxiety that had been building for months suddenly dissipated, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt since before Robert's death. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but one of recognition, finally seeing the situation for what it was and knowing my path forward. Michael and Jennifer exchanged confused glances, clearly not expecting this reaction. "I understand completely," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll be leaving then." The stunned silence that followed was almost comical. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed without producing words. Michael's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Leaving?" he finally managed. "Mom, don't be dramatic. Where would you even go?" "That's my concern, not yours," I replied, rising carefully from my chair and adjusting my knee brace. Without another word, I turned and made my way slowly down the stairs to my basement suite, gripping the railing tightly for support. Once in my private space, I closed the door and leaned against it, taking deep breaths to calm my racing heart. Was I really doing this? Leaving my son's home with no concrete plan, at 63 with a knee injury and limited options? Yes, I decided. I absolutely was. With methodical focus, I retrieved my largest suitcase from the closet and laid it open on the bed. I began with essentials: medications, toiletries, several changes of clothes. I found the accordion folder containing my important documents: birth certificate, social security card, insurance information, bank statements. These went into my carry-on bag, along with my laptop and phone charger. As I packed, memories flooded through me. Robert and I facing challenges together throughout our marriage. His voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "Peggy, never let anyone diminish your worth, not even our son." I thought about the patients I'd cared for during my nursing career. Elderly women who'd stayed in abusive or exploitative situations because they felt they had no options. I had always gently counseled them that they deserved better, that it was never too late to make a change. Now it was time to take my own advice. I heard Michael's heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by a hesitant knock on my door. "Mom, what are you doing?" His voice was a mixture of concern and irritation. I continued packing as I answered, exactly what I said I would do. "I'm leaving." He entered the room, eyes widening at the sight of my open suitcase. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting. We just meant that everyone needs to contribute to the household." "I understand that," I said calmly, folding a sweater. "And I've been contributing, cooking, cleaning, shopping, and providing childcare far beyond what we initially discussed. But when my actual health needs are dismissed as inconvenient, it's clear that this arrangement isn't working." "We didn't dismiss," he began, then stopped, perhaps realizing the inaccuracy of that statement. "Look, we're just frustrated about the timing. After our trip, we can discuss finding some help while your knee heals." "Michael," I said, pausing to look him directly in the eyes, "this isn't just about my knee or your trip. This is about respect, about seeing me as a person with my own needs, not just free childcare. You and Jennifer have made it very clear where I stand in this household, and I've made my decision. Where will you even go? He asked again, running his hand through his hair in frustration. You sold your house. All your furniture is gone. I'll figure it out, I replied, closing my suitcase and zipping it shut. I have friends, and contrary to how I've been treated lately, I'm a capable adult who managed my own life for decades before moving here. Mom, you're being dramatic. We didn't mean it like that. Michael insisted, his tone softening to the one he used when trying to soothe the twins during a tantrum. Jennifer was just stressed about the trip. Let's talk about this when we get back. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly tired of the circular conversation. Michael, answer me honestly. If I stay, will anything actually change? Will you and Jennifer suddenly start respecting my boundaries? Will you hire proper childcare instead of relying on me? Will my needs be considered equally important to your convenience? His telling silence confirmed what I already knew. Nothing would change. Perhaps there would be a brief period of increased sensitivity, but soon we would slide back into the same dynamic. Me giving and them taking until I had nothing left to give. I love you, I said softly. And I adore Emma and Ethan, but I need to love myself too, and that means removing myself from a situation where I'm not valued as a person. I stood carefully, mindful of my knee, and extended the handle of my suitcase. I'd like to say goodbye to the twins before I go. Michael looked like he might object, but then nodded silently. We made our way upstairs where Jennifer was distracting the children with a cartoon. She looked up sharply when she saw my suitcase. You're not seriously leaving, she stated, more accusation than question. I am, I confirmed, then turned my attention to Emma and Ethan. I lowered myself carefully to their level, balancing to keep weight off my injured knee. Grandma needs to go stay somewhere else for a while, I explained gently. Why? Emma asked, her small face scrunched in confusion. Because Grandma's knee is hurting, and I need a quiet place to rest and get better. I answered, simplifying the complex reality into terms a 4-year-old might understand. When will you come back? Ethan asked, his lower lip trembling. The question pierced my heart. I'm not sure, sweetheart, but I promise I'll see you again soon. Maybe we can have a special day at the park when my knee is all better. I hugged them both, breathing in the sweet scent of their shampoo and feeling their small arms around my neck. Tears threatened, but I held them back. I needed to be strong right now. Rising. I faced Jennifer one last time. Her expression had shifted from anger to something more complex. Perhaps a dawning realization that I was actually leaving, that her childcare solution was walking out the door. I hope you enjoy your anniversary trip, I said without sarcasm. The information about childcare options is on the kitchen counter. The agency can often place someone within 24 hours. Without waiting for a response, I wheeled my suitcase to the front door. Michael followed, a strange mix of emotions playing across his face. Frustration, concern, and perhaps a hint of respect for my resolve. At least let me drive you somewhere, he offered. No, thank you, I replied. I've already called a ride. This was a lie. I hadn't yet arranged transportation, but I needed a clean break. As I stepped out onto the front porch, the spring sunshine warmed my face, seeming to approve of my decision. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber, then sent a text to Sarah, my closest friend since nursing school. Need your guest room for a few days. We'll explain when I arrive. It's urgent. Her reply came almost immediately. Doors open. Stay as long as you need. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months began to lift. Yes, I was stepping into uncertainty. Yes, I had just complicated my relationship with my son. But for the first time since moving into their house, I was taking back control of my life. As the Uber pulled up to the curb, I glanced back at the house. Michael stood in the doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I gave him a small nod, then turned away, focusing on the road ahead. The driver helped me with my suitcase, commenting cheerfully about the beautiful spring day. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. Instead, I gazed out at the familiar Denver streets, seeing them with new eyes. The eyes of a woman who had just reclaimed her independence. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Willow Creek Apartments." I answered, giving Sarah's address. "I'm going home to a friend." As the car merged into traffic, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Grief at the rupture with my son, worry about the future, but most surprisingly, an undercurrent of liberation that grew stronger with each block we traveled away from Michael's house. I had walked away from an unhealthy situation rather than continuing to sacrifice my well-being for others' convenience. At 63, I was starting over again. Uncertain, yes, but on my own terms. And somehow, despite everything that felt right. Sarah lived in a second-floor apartment in a peaceful complex designed for active seniors. When she opened her door to find me standing there with my suitcase, her expression shifted from welcome to concern. "Peggy, what happened?" She immediately took my carry-on bag and ushered me inside. Once settled on her comfortable sofa with a cup of tea, I told her everything. The gradual escalation of childcare expectations, the dismissal of my knee injury, and finally, the ultimatum that had prompted my exit. "I knew something like this might happen," she said, shaking her head. "When you moved in with them, I worried they saw you more as a convenience than as family." "I should have listened to you," I admitted. "I was so focused on being close to the twins that I ignored the warning signs." "So what now?" Sarah asked practically. "You know you can stay here as long as you need, but I'm guessing you want your own place eventually." That night, I slept fitfully in Sarah's guest room, my phone lighting up periodically with texts and calls from Michael. I had sent him a brief message confirming I was safe, but declined to share my location or engage in further discussion. "I need time to process," I wrote. "Please respect that." The following morning, the emotional and physical toll caught up with me. I broke down over breakfast, sobbing into my toast as the reality of my situation hit home. Sarah simply passed me tissues and refilled my coffee, giving me space to release the pent-up feelings. "I left with no plan," I said when the tears finally subsided. "At my age, with a knee injury, what was I thinking?" "You were thinking that you deserve basic respect," Sarah replied firmly. "And you were right." Over the next few days, Sarah became my rock and practical advisor. She helped me organize a meeting with my financial advisor, Martin, who reviewed my situation with encouraging news. "You're actually in better shape than many retirees," Martin assured me, reviewing my accounts on his computer screen. "The proceeds from your house sale, combined with your pension and Social Security, give you a solid foundation. You can afford a modest apartment and still maintain your retirement fund." This assessment provided immense relief. I had feared that walking away from free housing might have jeopardized my financial security, but Martin's analysis showed I had options. He even suggested some 55-plus communities in the area that offered reasonable rents and amenities designed for seniors. While my knee slowly improved with rest and medication, I began researching housing options from Sarah's dining table. Within a week, I had scheduled visits to 3 different apartment complexes catering to active seniors. River Point Meadows particularly appealed to me, a well-maintained community with garden apartments, a community center, and organized activities for residents. The one-bedroom unit I toured was compact but thoughtfully designed with wide doorways, grab bars in the bathroom, and a small patio overlooking a shared garden. "We have a 3-month waiting list usually," the property manager explained apologetically. "I understand," I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. I would need to find temporary housing while waiting for an opening. The next day, however, the manager called with unexpected news. "Mrs. Wilson, a current resident, just gave notice they're moving to be closer to family. Their unit will be available in 2 weeks. Would you be interested? Absolutely, I said without hesitation. Where do I send the deposit? With housing secured, I began to feel more grounded. Sarah introduced me to friends in her community, including Dorothy, a retired teacher who had experienced a similar situation with her daughter's family. They assumed I'd be the built-in babysitter for my grandchildren, Dorothy confided over coffee in Sarah's kitchen. When I set boundaries, my daughter didn't speak to me for 6 months. Now we have a much healthier relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than expectation. Her story gave me hope that my relationship with Michael might eventually heal, though I knew it would take time and changes on both sides. Meanwhile, Michael continued texting daily, his messages evolving from initial anger. "I can't believe you would walk out like this," to concern, "Are you taking your blood pressure medication?" to grudging acceptance. "The twins miss you. When can they see you?" I responded with increasing openness as my own emotions stabilized, but I maintained firm boundaries. I would not discuss returning to their home. I would not babysit until my knee fully healed. And any future relationship would need to be based on mutual respect, not exploitation. 10 days after my departure, I received a tearful call from Emma. "Grandma, where are you?" Her small voice broke my heart. "I'm staying with a friend's sweetheart," I explained gently. "Remember how I told you my knee was hurting? I needed a quiet place to rest and get better. Daddy said you're mad at him and Mommy." I chose my words carefully, aware of little ears and the complexity of the situation. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, and they need some time apart to figure things out. But I'm not mad at you or Ethan. I miss you very much. When are you coming home? I'm going to have my own home soon, I told her. And when my knee is better, maybe you and Ethan can visit me there. Would you like that? Her enthusiastic yes brought tears to my eyes. That conversation prompted me to suggest meeting Michael at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop halfway between Sarah's apartment and his house. After 2 weeks of separation, I felt ready to communicate more directly about the future of our relationship. As my new apartment preparation progressed, I registered for a refresher nursing course that would allow me to work part-time at a local clinic. The prospect of returning to healthcare, even in a limited capacity, invigorated me. Nursing had always been more than a job. It was a core part of my identity that had been overshadowed during my months as full-time childcare. I also began sessions with a therapist, Dr. Landon, who specialized in family dynamics and late-life transitions. Her insights helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my decision to leave and the path forward. "You're grieving multiple losses," she observed during our second session. "The loss of your idealized grandparent role, the rupture with your son, and the home you created with your late husband. But you're also experiencing growth and reclaiming your identity. Both can exist simultaneously." By the time moving day arrived, 2 weeks after my abrupt departure from Michael's house, I had assembled a modest collection of necessities for my new apartment. A bed and dresser from a consignment shop kitchenware donated by Sarah and other friends, and a comfortable armchair that Dorothy insisted I take because she was downsizing anyway. The community welcomed me warmly. Neighbors brought welcome baskets and invitations to activities. The book club met in the community room every Wednesday. Morning yoga classes were offered 3 times a week. A volunteer coordinator came by to discuss opportunities for residents to mentor at-risk youth at a nearby community center. Standing in my new apartment that first evening, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, but already feeling more at home than I had in Michael's basement, I realized something profound. At 63, I wasn't just surviving a family crisis. I was building an entirely new life. And despite the pain that had precipitated this change, I felt a growing excitement about what this new chapter might hold. After 3 weeks in my new apartment, I agreed to meet Michael alone at Riverside Cafe, a quiet coffee shop with outdoor seating near the South Platte River. I arrived early, selecting a table somewhat removed from other patrons, and ordered a cappuccino to calm my nerves. The weather was perfect. Warm sunshine tempered by a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowering trees and freshly mowed grass from the nearby park. When Michael arrived, I was struck by his appearance. He looked tired with slight shadows under his eyes and a tenseness around his mouth that reminded me of how he looked during finals week in college. He spotted me, hesitated momentarily, then approached with an uncertain smile. "Mom." He greeted me, leaning down for an awkward half-hug before settling into the chair across from me. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied. "My knee is much better with proper rest and physical therapy." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. So many conversations had played out in my head during the past weeks, but now that we were face to face, I struggled to find the right opening. Michael spoke first. "I still can't believe you just left like that." His tone carried a hint of accusation that immediately put me on the defensive. I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Landon's advice to focus on I statements rather than accusations. "I felt I had no choice," I said carefully. "When my health concerns were dismissed and I was given an ultimatum about childcare, it became clear that my needs weren't being respected in your home." "That's not fair," Michael protested. "We gave you a place to live rent-free. All we asked was that you help with the kids." "Help is different from what was happening," I pointed out. "I became the default childcare provider, expected to be available whenever needed, regardless of my own plans or health. That wasn't our original understanding when I sold my house and moved in." Michael's expression tightened. "Do you have any idea what childcare costs in Denver for twins? We're talking almost $2,000 a month for quality care." "I understand childcare is expensive," I acknowledged. "But I'm your mother, Michael, not an employee. I moved in because we all thought it would benefit the family relationship, not to become an unpaid nanny." He stared down at his untouched coffee. "Jennifer's been interviewing nannies. The one we hired last week is already asking for more hours than we initially agreed to." I resisted the urge to point out the irony. "I'm sorry that's challenging." "The twins miss you," he said, changing tactics. "They ask about you every day." The mention of Emma and Ethan softened my resolve slightly. "I miss them too. That's why I suggested we meet at the park next week. I want to maintain my relationship with them, just not as their primary caregiver." Michael looked up, seemingly surprised by this firm boundary. "Mom, be reasonable. You're living alone in a senior apartment when you could have a comfortable space in our home. This whole situation is unnecessary." "That's where you're wrong," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "This was absolutely necessary. For my physical health, my emotional well-being, and my sense of identity. I'm more than just your mother or the twins' grandmother. I'm a person with my own needs and interests that matter." "So you're just done with us, with family?" His hurt was evident beneath the defensive tone. "No, Michael. I'm done with an unhealthy dynamic. I'm establishing boundaries that allow me to be part of the family without being exploited." I leaned forward slightly. "I want a relationship with you, Jennifer, and the twins, but one based on mutual respect, not convenience." He was silent for a long moment, absently stirring his coffee. "Jennifer thinks you're being selfish." "I imagine she does," I replied evenly. "Having unlimited free childcare was certainly convenient for both of you, but asking me to prioritize my own well-being isn't selfish. It's necessary. I just don't understand why you couldn't have discussed this instead of walking out." I sighed, remembering the many attempts I'd made to establish boundaries, all of which had been ignored or dismissed. "Michael, I tried, multiple times. When I mentioned needing personal time, it was treated as an inconvenience. When I brought up my knee injury, Jennifer focused on how it affected your trip plans, not my health. The ultimatum was just the final straw." Something in my tone must have reached him because his defensive posture softened slightly. "I guess Maybe we did take advantage of the situation. It was just so helpful having you there. I know, I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. And I loved being part of your daily lives, but not at the expense of my own. So where do we go from here? He asked, finally, looking directly at me. I'd like to establish a new relationship, one where I'm Grandma Peggy, who visits regularly and occasionally watches the twins for special occasions, not the live-in childcare provider. And if we need help more regularly, then you hire someone like any other working parents, I replied firmly. I'm happy to help in emergencies or for planned events, but with advance notice and with respect for my limitations and other commitments. Michael nodded slowly, seeming to process this new reality. Can I see your apartment? The request surprised me, but I welcomed it as a potential step toward understanding. Yes, I'd like that. Why don't you come by after we meet with the twins at the park next week? I can show you around and introduce you to some of my neighbors. Our conversation continued for another hour, gradually moving from the tense topic of my departure to more neutral ground. Michael's work projects my physical therapy progress, a funny story about Ethan's preschool art project. By the time we parted, the atmosphere had shifted from confrontational to cautiously conciliatory. I'll talk to Jennifer about the park meetup, Michael said as we prepared to leave. She's still upset, but I think seeing you with the twins would be good for everyone. I hope so, I replied. Please tell her I'm not trying to punish anyone. I'm just trying to create a healthier relationship for all of us. As I watched Michael walk to his car, I felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Our relationship had been damaged, perhaps permanently altered, but not destroyed. There was a path forward, though it would require adjustment on both sides. The following week brought our planned meeting at Washington Park, a spacious green space with playgrounds and walking paths. I arrived early, finding a bench near the playground with good visibility, but also some shade to protect my still sensitive knee from too much sun. The twins spotted me before Michael parked the car, racing across the grass, with delighted shouts of, "Grandma, Grandma!" I opened my arms to them, relishing their enthusiastic hugs and rapid-fire updates about preschool, their new nanny. She doesn't read voices in books like you do, Grandma. And the tadpoles they were watching grow in a classroom aquarium. Michael approached more slowly Jennifer beside him. Her expression was controlled, polite, but distant. I acknowledged her with a nod and a small smile, which she returned stiffly. Thank you for bringing them, I said simply. They've missed you, she replied, her tone neutral. The next hour passed pleasantly as I watched the twins play, occasionally joining them for less active games that wouldn't strain my knee. Michael and Jennifer sat nearby, sometimes participating, sometimes engaged in their own quiet conversation. The tension remained, but the children's joy created a buffer that made interaction possible. As our visit concluded, I invited Michael to follow me to my apartment as planned. Jennifer opted to take the twins home for their nap, her relief at avoiding further interaction with me evident in her quick goodbye. 20 minutes later, Michael stood in the center of my small apartment, turning slowly to take in the space I'd created. The furnishings were modest, but comfortable personal touches already evident in the photographs on the walls and the colorful throw pillows on the sofa. It's nice, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. Smaller than I expected, but it feels like you. It's perfect for one person, I replied. And the community is wonderful. There's always something happening in the common areas if I want company, but I have privacy when I need it. I showed him the community center with its library and gathering spaces, introduced him to Dorothy, who happened to be watering plants in the courtyard, and explained the various activities available to residents. You've created a whole life in just a few weeks, Michael observed as we returned to my apartment for tea. I had to, I said simply. It was either that or wallow in regret, and I've never been much for wallowing. As he prepared to leave, Michael paused at the door. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly. I should have stood up for you when Jennifer and I were pressuring you about childcare. I knew your knee was bothering you, but I ignored it because it was easier. The apology, unexpected and seemingly sincere, brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that, I managed. It means a lot. Dad would be disappointed in how I treated you, he added, his voice rough with emotion. He always taught me to respect you, and I failed at that. We all make mistakes, I said gently. What matters is how we move forward. He nodded, then surprised me with a tight hug before leaving. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a weight lifting from my heart. The conversation hadn't solved everything, but it had opened a door to healing that had seemed firmly closed just weeks before. Over the next few months, my relationship with Michael gradually strengthened. We established a routine of weekly visits with the twins, sometimes at my apartment, sometimes at the park, occasionally at their home when Jennifer was out. These visits were focused on quality time rather than childcare, allowing me to fully enjoy my role as grandmother without the exhaustion of full-time responsibility. Jennifer remained distant initially, but as she observed my consistent presence on these new terms, her attitude slowly thawed. The turning point came when Emma developed a high fever one weekend while Jennifer was attending a conference out of town. Michael, overwhelmed with 2 sick children, called me in desperation. Of course I'll help, I said without hesitation. This is exactly the kind of situation where family should step in. I spent the weekend at their house drawing on my nursing background to care for Emma while Michael focused on Ethan. By the time Jennifer returned Sunday evening, Emma's fever had broken, and both children were resting comfortably. Thank you, Jennifer said awkwardly as I prepared to leave. Michael told me how you knew exactly what to do when Emma's fever spiked. 40 years of emergency nursing comes in handy sometimes, I replied with a small smile. I've been unfair to you, she admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. I resented you for leaving when we needed childcare, but I never considered what you needed. It wasn't a full apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a starting point for a more respectful relationship. In the months that followed, Jennifer became more willing to include me in family gatherings, and I noticed she made efforts to ask about my activities and interests rather than focusing solely on my availability for the twins. As my 1-year anniversary in my new apartment approached, I found myself in a position I couldn't have imagined during those first uncertain days after leaving Michael's home. I had a part-time position supervising nursing students at a local hospital, fulfilling work that valued my experience without overtaxing my physical limitations. My social circle had expanded to include neighbors, colleagues, and members of various community groups I'd joined. Perhaps, most surprisingly, I had developed a special friendship with Howard, a widower from the apartment next door, who shared my love of mystery novels and Sunday morning walks in the nearby botanical gardens. Our relationship was developing slowly, companionship gradually deepening into something that might eventually become more. My relationship with the twins flourished under the new arrangement. Our scheduled visits became special occasions they looked forward to, and my apartment became Grandma's special place, where they had their own drawer of toys and books. Without the stress of daily discipline and constant supervision, I found new joy in our time together, creating the kind of warm memories I had hoped for when I first agreed to move in with Michael's family. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, almost exactly a year after my departure from Michael's house, I received a surprising package in the mail. Inside was a handmade card from the twins, covered in glitter and wobbly drawings of what appeared to be our family. Tucked behind it was a letter from Michael written in his precise engineer's handwriting. Dear Mom, it began. As we approach Thanksgiving, I've been reflecting on this past year and the difficult but necessary changes in our family. When you walked out that day, I was angry and confused. I couldn't understand how you could abandon us when we needed you. Now seeing how you've built this new life, how much healthier and happier you are, and how our relationship has evolved, I understand it wasn't abandonment at all. It was self-preservation and ultimately the best thing for all of us. Jennifer and I have learned valuable lessons about respect boundaries and not taking family for granted. The twins have benefited from seeing their grandmother as a person with her own life and interests, not just someone who exists to care for them. And you have reclaimed the retirement you deserve after decades of caring for others. I'm sorry for the ultimatum that drove you away, but I'm grateful for the stronger, more honest relationship that has grown from that painful moment. Thank you for having the courage to walk out that door. We're all better for it, even if it took me too long to see that. With love and respect, Michael. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of profound relief and validation. The painful decision I'd made a year ago, walking out with a suitcase and an uncertain future, had ultimately led to healing I couldn't have imagined possible. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner in my apartment for the first time. The space was small, requiring creative furniture arrangements to accommodate Michael, Jennifer, the twins, Howard, and Dorothy. But somehow, the coziness enhanced rather than detracted from the celebration. As we gathered around my modest table, I looked at the faces of these people who had become my chosen family, some by birth, others by circumstance, and felt a deep contentment. When Michael raised his glass in a toast, his words captured perfectly the journey we had all taken. To Mom, who taught us that sometimes the most courageous act of love is walking away. Jennifer added softly, and to new beginnings built on mutual respect. As conversation and laughter filled my small apartment, I reflected on the extraordinary year behind me and the possibilities ahead. At 63, I had discovered that life could still surprise me, that relationships could heal and transform, and that it was never too late to assert my worth and reclaim my identity. The suitcase I had packed in haste that fateful day now sat in the back of my closet, a reminder of both the pain of leaving and the liberation of starting anew. I had learned perhaps the most important lesson of my life, that sometimes the heaviest suitcase to carry is filled with others' expectations. And once you set it down, you discover just how far and freely you can walk. Have you ever had to walk away from a family situation to preserve your own well-being? What gave you the courage to make that difficult choice? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you're currently struggling with family boundaries, remember that setting healthy limits is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. Please like, subscribe, and share this video if my journey resonated with you. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to carry your own suitcase wherever your path may lead.